Moi drodzy widzowie, korzystając z długiego majowego weekendu, postanowiłem wybrać się do White Peak Distillery w Anglii, czyli destylarni, która jest znana z produkcji whisky Wireworks. Także idziemy na tour. Zapraszam.
Okay, so welcome to our still house platform. This is where we produce single malt spirit. This will later on become single malt whiskey once it's been in a wooden cask, just like that one behind you, for at least 3 years. So you're waiting a very long time to realise your product. Now we start in the room behind us, and in there we keep our raw ingredient. Our raw ingredient is barley, and we use a combination of peated and unpeated barley in the production of our spirit. Now, is anybody familiar with the difference? Anybody like really smoky whiskies? Yeah, lovely. So in a region of Scotland known as Islay, they tend to produce these very heavily peated, very smoky, almost medicinal whiskies. Now they will use 100% heavily peated barley. Now when barley is going through its malting process, the very last part of that process is a drying process. And at this point, peat from the earth is burnt underneath that barley bed, the smoke rises up and imparts that smoky medicinal type flavour into the barley itself. That flavour will then come through in every single part of the process that we're going to look at today. Now, you've actually come to us on a day where we're running a local Derbyshire barley. So we've got a local farmer to grow some for us, and this is completely unpeated. So there's no smokiness in this barley whatsoever. You'll be able to tell that when you have a smell. So our standard mash bill, we use 20% heavily peated barley. The other 80% is completely unpeated. This is because we don't want to produce a very smoky spirit. We just want something really subtle, and this ratio works for us. Now we also mill our barley in the room behind us, and what milling does is passes the barley through 2 sets of rollers. This crushes the barley up, which exposes the starch on the inside. Now the starch is the most important part, as this goes on to create alcohol when we go on to fermentation. So we mill 0.6 of a tonne of barley per batch that we make. That comes up from this room behind us, through that chute, up into this hopper above our mash tun. And what we do first thing in the morning is we drop that barley into the mash tun and we add hot water at the same time. We then turn on these rakes, which go around quite slowly. This gives a really nice even bed of the barley and the water, allowing that hot water to penetrate into every single barley kernel to start pulling out that much needed starch. Now underneath the barley bed there is a sieve. This allows the liquid only to pass through. This liquid is called wort, and that goes onto your fermentation process. Anything left over in here at the end of the day is known as draff, and this is just the spent barley, and that goes away to a local farmer who uses it to feed his cows with. Now there's no alcohol production going on here, so we're not getting the cows drunk, but it's a really good way of us to be able to get rid of something that's of no use to us anymore, which a farmer can use for his cows. Please do feel free to come and have a look in the mash tun, have a smell. Be careful, the sides are very, very hot. If you're wearing glasses, you'll steam up, and just be careful of any like hats or glasses on your head don't fall in. Okay, so we all had a look and a smell inside the mash tun. That process is known as mashing. The next part of the process that we're going to look at is fermentation, and we ferment using these vessels along the wall side here. So what we do is we start to draw that wort from the underside of the mash tun using pipes and pumps that are all underneath the platform, and we start to fill one of our vessels up from the bottom. Now once we've been filling a vessel for around about 40 minutes to an hour, it's just so the liquid level can get above the heat sensor so we know what the temperature is before we pitch our yeast. We let it get to that point. We then start to add our yeast. So our very first yeast is a dried distiller's yeast. This yeast is engineered for a good alcohol yield, so we get about an 8% ABV alcohol after our fermentation period, which is 7 days in length. So we give that yeast about 10 minutes to activate because it's dried. It does take a little bit of time. We then add our second type of yeast, which is a live wet brewer's yeast. Now, is anybody familiar with Thornbridge Brewery at Bakewell? Yeah? So they produce an IPA called Jaipur, and they let us have the yeast from the production of that beer. I personally go and collect it myself every single week, and we pitch an amount of that into every single whiskey fermentation that we make. It's a really nice link to another Derbyshire business who we collaborate with quite frequently, but it also adds a really nice citrus element to the fermentation, which then comes through when we distill. So now those two different types of yeast are in there. What they are doing is they're starting to pull that starch out of the wort, breaks it down into more fermentable sugars. This is creating alcohol and also creating carbon dioxide. So at the moment I have got 3 whiskey fermentations in process and 1 rum fermentation. So the rum fermentation is directly behind you here. It's about 2 months old now, so it's definitely ready for distillation. We usually ferment our rum fermentation for at least a month, so this one's had double the amount of time. But the longer we seem to leave our fermentation, the fruitier the spirit we get. So it's no bad thing at all. So that one's fine, no carbon dioxide production going on. You can smell till your heart's content with that one. The one directly behind you, vessel number 4, this is the one that I went into yesterday. So this is your most active fermentation, a lot of carbon dioxide being produced, so please do just be extra careful. Number 2 is the one that I went into the day previous, so still a bit of activity going on in there, will be carbon dioxide, so again, be careful. Number 1 is the one that I'm going into right now, so the liquid level will be lower, and that is literally just the wort going into the fermentation vessel. Nothing yeast-wise has been added as yet. Please feel free to have a look across the washbacks. Just be careful of number 3, which is closed. It is running through a cleaning sequence at the moment, so it will be hot. Enjoy. Okay, so that was fermentation, and what we have after that 7-day period is 3,000 litres of a liquid that is now known as wash, and it's an 8% ABV alcohol. So what we do now is we go on to distillation. Now we distill our liquid twice. We have one distillation in the still closest to us, which is the wash still, and then a second distillation in the still just behind that one, which is the spirit still. So we transfer a full fermentation vessel's worth of wash into our first still. Now we heat these vessels using steam. There is a coil in the bottom of each one which heats up. Now alcohol is more volatile than water, so we'll start to evaporate first. And what we're trying to do through these 2 distillations is to really concentrate that ABV level up from that 8% to about 76% first thing in the morning. So it's incredibly strong. So you're on the best tour for alcohol. So the vapor starts to evaporate up the body of the still. As it does, it starts to lose its heat energy and it drops back down into the still as a liquid. Now this process repeats itself throughout the day and is known as reflux. Now there's a reason that stills are either fully made of copper or at least have copper elements inside them, and that is so that liquid and vapor refluxing around in the still is contacting that copper as much as possible. There's a chemical reaction that occurs whereby the copper removes the sulfate from that liquid and vapor going around. So it's effectively cleaning it. Any of the vapor that makes its way into the copper line arm at the top hits our condenser, which is a cold surface. Now, this is where we actually utilise the River Derwent, which is directly behind us. So like with the wireworks previous to us, they used to draw water in from the river and use it in cooling. We do the exact same thing here with our still. So we draw water in. It goes through a shell and tube operation within the still. It doesn't touch the product as it's not potable enough to be able to do that. But it will then cool, which will allow that vapor to convert back into a liquid, which will then drop through our brass box, which is our spirit safe, and then the liquid flows down into a tank underneath the platform. And the water just goes back out into the river, slightly warmer, but within parameters set to us by the Environment Agency. So after our first distillation, what we have is a 24% ABV alcohol that is now known as low wines. And we've lost about 1/3 of the amount of liquid through our first distillation. So the very next day, we take those low wines, we place them into the next still, which is your spirit still, and the exact same process occurs in there. Well, this is where the alcohol starts to really shoot up, and it comes off in the morning at about 76% ABV. So it's incredibly strong, and it's why I'm always smiling. Now, the second distillation, we don't use all of the liquid produced. We actually divide the liquid into three, and we take the best spirit, which is your single malt spirit. It's also known as the heart cut. But the very first fraction that we run is known as 4 shots. This is very volatile alcohol. There's a lot of methanol in there. It's actually poisonous. You wouldn't want to drink it. So we actually take that and recycle it in the next day's spirit distillation just to recoup more alcohol from. The second fraction, this is your single malt spirit. This will go into a cask and later on become single malt whiskey once it's been in there for at least 3 years. Now, we only get about 350 litres of single malt spirit per distillation that we do. So you've gone from 3,000 litres of wash to only getting 350 litres of single malt spirit. So you lose a lot throughout the process. Now, single malt spirit will taste different in every single distillery that you go to. It's not a neutral spirit. There is a lot of flavour coming through that spirit safe right now. So it's the single malt spirit that we're running at the moment. And that is because distilleries use different barleys. They use different yeast strains. They ferment for different amounts of time. They have different shaped stills, and they also run those stills at different rates. And all of that combined will transfer to different flavours coming out. So our standard single malt spirit is slightly smoky and very, very fruity. Now, as I said, we're running a local Derbyshire spirit at the moment. So it's very, very different. It also behaves very differently throughout the process. And that's actually coming off more malty and a little bit more citrusy. The very last fraction that we collect is a liquid known as faints. That is just any alcohol that doesn't fit the flavour profile we're trying to create. That is collected along with the 4 shots and again is recycled in the next day's spirit distillation. Now, we do have to deal with what's left over in the stills at the end of the day. Anything left over in the wash still is known as pot ale. That goes away to a local farmer who uses it as fertiliser. Anything left over in the spirit still at the end of the day is known as spent lees. That is just 2% alcohol and water. That stays in the still until the next day, keeping it warm so that we don't have to fire it up as hard the next day, but ultimately that liquid does go down the drain. That is literally the only wastage through this entire process apart from water usage. Okay, so that is whiskey making to the point that the liquid goes into a wooden cask. So you can see the liquid coming through that spirit safe is completely clear. That is how it goes into a wooden cask. It derives all of its colour from the wood. But as mentioned, we've been developing flavour throughout this entire process. The cask itself is our very last part of flavour development, and it is our biggest variable, because each cask is a complete individual. Those casks have come from different countries, different areas, different forests, different trees. And even if you fill the same cask types side by side, you can come to sample them a few years later and you will get slight variations. It really is quite interesting. Any questions before we go and have a look at maturation and casks? Okay, let's go down. Okay, so welcome to one of 3 cask maturation rooms that we have here at White Peak Distillery. These are more commonly known as a dunnage, particularly if they have an earth floor, we're more dunnage style. There's one just above our heads which is the same size, and then one to the rear of the building which is much larger. So this is where we keep our casks once we've filled them with that single malt spirit that you saw coming from the spirit safe, and this is where it will sit for at least 3 years while it legally matures into whiskey. Now, the types of casks that we use here on a regular basis are ex-bourbon casks. We also use these ex-red wine casks as well. These are the ones we use most of. So our ex-bourbon casks come to us from Heaven Hills Distillery in Kentucky. Now, we do have them shipped over whole, so we are shipping a lot of air, but that does help guard against future leaks. And there's always a nice little bit of bourbon left over in there when they arrive, which is always nice. So they are made of American oak, and they are 200 litres. These ones here, slightly larger at 225 litres. These come to us from Porto in Portugal, and these have been sourced by a local cooperage in Porto from the red wine industry. Now, these casks have to go through a rejuvenation process before they come to us. This process is known as STR, which stands for shaved, toasted and recharred. And the reason they have to go through this process is because they've been in wine production, and wine is a lower ABV level. If they get left a little while, all sorts of nasties can start growing inside there. So this STR process negates that and also prepares the cask for spirit production. So the cooper shaves a layer of the wood from the inside of each of the casks, which exposes new but still wine-stayed wood underneath. They then toast it, which allows wood sugar to come to the forefront. Now, wood sugar is really important for the maturation of your spirit, as it really helps to mellow that liquid out, takes away the rough edges, and also helps to develop flavour. Then they re-char it, so they set it on fire on the inside, which gives it this new black char layer. So I'll pass that round for you to have a look at. There you go. Just be careful if you're wearing white, it does come off on your fingers and it doesn't smell anymore, unfortunately. So your 3 layers of wood there, you have your black char layer. So as soon as that clear liquid hits it, it passes through that layer into the toasted layer. Now, your toasted layer is where you're going to pick up all of your colour and some flavour. And underneath that, you have your wood layer, which is where those wood sugars are. So just to show you the difference between the liquid coming out of the 2 different cask types after only 1 year of maturation, this is what we have coming out of an ex-bourbon cask. Now, as you can see, there is colour impartation already, and you will also have different flavours going on as well. Thank you very much, Molly. But as this is only a year old, it's still classified as spirit, and it will not age in the bottle. It would have to go back into a cask if it was ever going to become whiskey. But it's an example, so it probably won't happen. This is what we have coming out of an ex-red wine cask after the same amount of time. So you can see completely different colours, and you will have different flavour profiles going on in there as well. So this is how distilleries can release so many different expressions of their whiskey by taking that single malt spirit, putting it into different cask types. You get different colours and different flavours coming out. Now, we don't just have the 2 cask types that I've mentioned, we do have many, many more. We have some virgin casks which have never been used before. We've had ex-stout, ex-port, ex-sherry, ex-calvados. We've also got some from Islay as well. So they've had a very heavily peated whiskey in before they've come to us. So there is quite a range of whiskey that we can produce. Now, unfortunately, we do suffer losses from our casks. This is completely unavoidable. Any evaporative losses is known as the angel's share. It's constant evaporation from these casks. Now, angel's share, it's not too bad down here, but it's usually quite cool throughout the year. But upstairs, which is on the same level as the stills, a lot warmer. So we do tend to see more loss to the angels up there. On the flip side, maturation is quicker up there than it is down here. So it's quite good that we can then move casks around to suit our maturation needs. We also lose liquid through leaks. You might see some as you're going around, changes in temperature, humidity. Casks will expand and contract with their environment, so there will spring leaks from time to time. Now, thankfully, most of them do tend to bung themselves back up, so it's not too much of an issue. We also lose liquid through sampling. It's all part of my job. Quality control. Please do feel free to have a look around the dunnage. I'm here for any questions. Okay, if you all want to gather back round, we'll make our way back into the distillery. On this side we have our bottling shed, Absolutely everything that we produce here is bottled in this room. It's all done by hand. Everything has its stopper put in, its labelling put on, and then it's boxed up ready to leave the distillery. On this side of the distillery is the underneath of the equipment and the distillery itself. So you've got all the pipework, the pumps, the heat exchangers, the underneath of the vessels. I did have to become a bit of a plumber to do this job. You'll be able to see all the pipework there. I'm still learning it all, really. But yeah, I can't take you under there. It's very slippy. There's a lot of things you can trip over. So but please have a look as you go past. Okay, so I'll just introduce the table to you while we're waiting for somebody to come back from the loo. But you have. So thank you very much. You've been an absolutely lovely tour. I will be in the shop if you have any additional questions or if you do want to sample anything else. But if you want to give your glasses a rinse in your sink, you're more than welcome to do so, and I'll wrap them up in the shop for you. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, take one of those.